story was They Pour Fire from the Sky. So before we start, our authors are basically the main characters. So you can... Okay, so the title, They Pour Fire on Us from the Sky, the true story of three lost boys from Spain. It was published in May 2005, written by Benson Deng of Aleppo Deng and Benjamin Ajak, with the assistance of Judy A. Bernstein, who was the mentor when they came from Africa to the U.S. They arrived to the U.S. around 2000-2001. This is a true story about how these three boys, they struggled to survive when they were forced to leave their villages, families, and lives behind them in order to flee the violence in Sudan. Well, my title quote, this is how they kind of got the title. There was a plane standing above trees, pouring fire on them. This is a quote from Benson from when they first started attacking the village. Judy was hesitant at first to receive three boys from Africa. She didn't really know how to take it in. After she met them, she started to feel bad for them, and she was deeply touched by their story. She immediately dropped all of her writing, because she was a writer. She actually she was writing a history novel, and she immediately dropped that and helped them write their book. Within the first 50 pages of this book, Benson describes an attack on their peaceful villages. This is a quote: "A bright fireball fell from the sky, its thunder echoed to the edge of the forest. The boys just like them all over southern Sudan were forced to move to Ethiopia and became refugees, and they were referred to as lost boys. Once they got their book, they started writing the book, Johnny Evans, who is the vice president of the William Morris Agency, he agreed to represent them, and Clive Kittle at the Public Affairs recognized the possibility for a book.
Okay, the style. In this story, there's a descriptive style of writing because they're describing the Second Sudanese War, Civil War. The style of writing focuses on a specific character, event, or place, and it's often used in journal/diary type of writing, which this writing is. Because as you can see in these pictures below, I've taken a picture of each chapter, and the chapter has its name and who wrote it. So Benjamin, Benson, and Alifa would take turns writing. The journal type form started when they came to America, and the woman Judy helped them out. When they first came, they were really amazed by what America has. They didn't know what a car was. They didn't know what a seatbelt was and how to put it on. And so she took them to Burger King, and then she took them to Walmart. And they were walking along the aisles, and the first thing they noticed was a journal. And then they were so amazed because they've seen paper, but they haven't seen it combined in a notebook type. So they really, really wanted the journal, which was cheap, 50 cents. So Judy bought them journals, and then they started writing this book. And it's just a biography of the tragedies and what they had to experience during the war.
So we combined authors and main characters because, like I said in the beginning, the main characters are the authors. So Benson, he is very quiet at the beginning of the story. He's a good boy, and he never really complained. He was the fifth son of farmers. His dad, he farmed goats and cows, right? And cattle. And then his dad had 5 wives, and his mom was the third one. That looked like her tradition, right? So, he also had 5 brothers, Elipho being one of the brothers, and he had 3 sisters. So in his village, to be rich, he had to own 150 cows. His dad owned not 90, so he was very happy. So he described his father, quote, his father was usually away attending court because he was an important member of society who helped in difficult positions. So basically if there was an issue in other villages, his father would go and like, sort of, yeah. His chores in the village were to take the goats, sheep, and cows to gaze, and he was 4 when he was doing that stuff. He didn't mind being naked because that was his tradition over there. Until the age of 4, he wasn't really happy seeing other kids with clothes on, and his father told them that at your age it was fine, but he was still quite upset. And then his mother would harvest termites, and that's like the size of the termites in Sudan, so they're really huge. So at night the bigger termites came out of the mound, bigger than a man. My mother would harvest them by digging a hole the size of a large pumpkin in front of the mound, and waiting behind it with a burning bundle of dry grasses. So once his mother would harvest termites, they would have like termite soup. Yeah. So you can avoid it.
Okay, so this is Benson. He had his cousin, which his nephew, which was his best friend. And one day they were like playing together outside, and one guy comes and gets his little nephew and takes him away. He starts crying and this and that. And then Benson's brother comes and gets him, and it turns out like by the age of 4, it's a tradition where the boys get circumcised. And they got circumcised by the age of 4 with like a really blunt knife, so it really hurt them.
Yeah, and he says, I was happy to have passed the uncircumcised stage, but it wasn't worth the pain I went through. So he describes it as really, really painful.
Oh, and one of the ways that they would make money is that his mom would make like pots out of clay, and either they would trade it for food or they would trade it for money, and they would get clothing and stuff like that. Another tradition of theirs was like by the age of 6, they were supposed to take, once all the teeth came out, they were supposed to take a couple of the front teeth and a couple of the bottom teeth out. They would just pull them out, and if they didn't, it was hard for them to get married. They weren't attractive. So it was always
No.
Yeah,
If
because
they took out these teeth or like the
a couple of front teeth and like bottom teeth.
So
If they
like
did
3
it,
top ones and 3 bottom.
Yeah.
and they weren't attractive if they didn't.
yeah,
Yeah.
they wouldn't find like
Yeah,
a good woman.
The girls made fun of them
It
if they
was-
didn't have their teeth
a
taken
quote
out.
was, the girls told those of teeth, you aren't a man and haven't endured the pain of manhood. And it was his uncle who took the teeth out. And in the story, there was a girl that went to take her teeth out too, and she didn't scream or anything, so the guys were all ashamed because the girl couldn't endure the pain. He was 7 years old when the attack on his village happened. And then he became best friends with a boy named Monmid, because during their travels, Monmid gave him water when he was like really sick, so like, that started their friendship. So this is Aleppo. This is Benson's brother. He was very, very lazy. He did stuff that people didn't like. So his real name is Alphonsien, but his like nickname was Aleppo. He was the 3rd son. He's 2 years younger than Benson. So yeah, he was very fast. So any time that he did something wrong, he would run away from his mom. He would just run. Okay, so he fought and did things that people didn't like, and this is one thing in his chapter he wrote. When people were eating, I'd hold sand in my hand and pretend to sneeze. I'd chew and blow sand over everybody's food. Then I'd say, you stopped eating. Why you stopped eating? So he would do things just to like spite himself. He tried to prove everyone wrong. So he liked being right all the time in his village. And then Dean was his father and Benson's father. And he describes him as very athletic. He was half bald and he was very muscular. So at the beginning, when they're in the village, he's very skinny, and they don't really describe how they look like throughout the story because this book is like 15 years long in their journey. So every chapter, they don't really give you a time frame. So at the beginning, he's described as skinny. His village was attacked when he was 7 years old. He got yellow fever and was very sick throughout later on in the story. When he came to Camp Kakuma, which was created in 1992, he went and he studied English, and he was very bright in that camp. He was very smart, and he said that the life in Kakuma was good until like the famine came in 1996, and he said it was very bad once the famine came. Okay, so this is a quote that Aleppo did. He said, and it's about being a refugee. So this is, being a refugee is something that many people cannot understand. Refugee life was like being devoured by wild animals. We lived 5 of us in one house. The little ration we received were collected and cooked as a meal once a day, but we had an appetite there wasn't enough to eat as young growing boys with tender bones and body. Nutritional diseases are rampant in the camp. Children died from rhizmas, kwashiorkor, anemia, and beriberi. Rickets was the worst with the young boys. Almost everyone was bow-legged. It was hard for boys to go to school with empty stomachs. An empty stomach cannot carry a healthy mind. So they struggled a lot trying to learn, and trying to live in that camp because it was very bad. And this was in Kenya. And the Kenyan soldiers were very bad to them, like they would just beat them, and they couldn't say anything because they said something, they would go to jail. Go to the next slide.
Okay, so Benjamin was born in 1882. Benjamin was one of their cousins. And he was 5 years old when he had to flee his village. Like, you have to understand that they were all like related, but they all got separated between the war. Benson was with his sister when the war broke down, so he left, and then it was Aleppo. After 2 years, he got lost, and then it was him too. And then they told him, like, in order to like survive the attack, his father told him, if our village is attacked, you must be quiet and quickly run into the bush and hide. So that's exactly what he did when like the soldiers came and attacked. He got separated and began to search for his family. We found his cousins Lino and Emmanuel. When he got to the town called Tonj, he laid down and found his cousin Benson. Then like they were like so desperate to keep finding trees, so they would like basically do anything, and, like climbing trees or whatever, and they would get poisoned or fall and break stuff, like their bones.
Yeah, so in the camp, he climbed a tree and he fell and he really injured his leg, which was really bad because they always had to travel. They would stay in the camp for like 3 months and things got really bad and they would travel. The first time they traveled somewhere was going to Ethiopia, and they did 3 months of walking. So his leg being injured and like his bone was going out and it got infected all the time, so he endured a lot. But he never like complained. He was described as very brave.